Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the FOURQUET debate, and we're talking on the day when South Korea's president offered to tend her resignation. Our panel thinks it really wasn't a resignation offer, but more a diversion. Our panelists, who we'll introduce right now, Claire Ham, who, welcome back, your documentary filmmaker, or producer, based in Germany. Your upcoming documentary to be broadcast in the spring is called Paused in Time, about the 2014 seawall ferry disaster. With us as well, Dorian Malovic, Asia editor for French newspaper La Croix, co-author in French of North Korea in 100 Questions. Just before the break, we were talking about South Korea's president. In China, they call them princelings. She is someone who is the daughter of a former dictator who led South Korea through a time of immense change in the 60s and 70s before his 1979 assassination. Dorian Malovic was saying how she's somebody who was orphaned by that assassination. And my question, when we were talking about this late cult leader who died in 1994, did voters know about all this stuff when they voted for her as president?
That's the problem of Korean media system, because the president can appoint a lot of head of public broadcasting, so they control the media seriously. So a lot of things we didn't know. I never heard of Chae Tae-min and Choi Soon-sil. I read newspaper every day, but we never knew for 40 years. Only the politicians they knew, and they did a very good job hiding it. And the media, they are not brave enough to reveal it. So we are very upset.
Are you sure? Because I mean, there were WikiLeaks cables that were uncovered,
there were no
warning.
internet before,
No, but in 2007, 2008, saying that there was this undue influence by Choi's father and daughter.
No, that was a very little issue. I never heard about that before. I think they did. Maybe you have a different opinion, but
well, I would say at the time, I mean, we had before the presidents were left-wing president, and they would get closer to North Korea, and then after that it would be radicalized and get a right-wing turn, stronger on the right wing. And then she was suddenly she became a lawmaker, and then the Senuri found in her an opportunity to have someone famous and popular. And I would tend to agree with Ms. Ham about even the media in South Korea. Even if we say it's of course it's a democracy, but it's very much controlled. But we don't know much about that, even in Europe or in the States. You have a blacklist of more than 2,000 people, like trade unions or artists, journalists, and teachers, who are under surveillance by the public security because they criticize the regime, which can be unbelievable for the image we have of South Korea with Samsung and freedom and technology. But it's still a very strongly framed society. And when you are in power, you control a lot of things. That means the collusion with the big chaebols.
You control a lot of things, but it is a democracy, a rough and tumble one at times. We remember back in the 1980s, the spectacular student demonstrations that could be very violent. Here we've seen mass protests, much more peaceful. What would you say is the big difference between the protests we've seen the last few weeks and what we saw 2 decades ago?
I mean, that shows everything. I mean, in the 80s, it was the fight for democracy, freedom, human rights, and free elections after more than 30 years of dictatorship. Okay, some economic improvements. And South Korea had the Olympics in '88. That was really very glamorous. It was great. South Korea just opened up to the world, but it was really closed country. The people haven't traveled at the time. It was violent because it was very, very political. It was radicalized, and the control of the military was very strong on the underground opposition. Today, the nature of the demonstration is different. It's from all the class people. They come from the
All walks of
countryside.
life.
All walks of life, yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. Coming from the countryside, coming from everywhere, the youngsters, even the older people now, 60, 70 years, they bring their children or grandchildren, they say, okay, we had a queen in power, and she became a traitor thanks to the relationships with the witch. The witch is Chesun-chil, you know. And they say now, she's a traitor. We don't want her now to be in charge. She betrayed us. And the seawall is really strong. We didn't cover that a lot in Europe, but for months, there were demonstrations of the people. I was in Seoul at the time on the big avenue. There was a big yellow ribbons to remember the death of the 300 people and the families. They were families from the countryside. They were not family from Seoul. So the anger is national. And the nature, it's the family thing, you know. They've learned not to provoke, no brutality, even though some people would guess they could be martial law again, you know, but it was just a whisper and, you know, rumors about this. But as long as it is quiet, it's going to be nice. It's going to be okay.
We're in the company now, and we can welcome from Boston political scientist Kathy Moon, who teaches at Wellesley College. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. And you heard there Dorian Malovic comparing the protests we've seen, the mass protests we've seen in South Korea over the past few weeks with the protests for democracy we saw in the 1980s. At the heart of this also is this questioning, I suppose, of the model, the way it has evolved. South Korea has been an amazing success story economically with these big conglomerates like Samsung. And these conglomerates are now bogged down in the scandal. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's not an unusual situation for the conglomerates to be involved in some kind of a political scandal or corruption scandal. Unfortunately, South Korea has more than its fair share of political scandals, economic scandals. And I think part of the problem is that the political elite are so close to the economic elite. It's nearly inseparable. And this is something that governments, since the financial crisis of 1997, tried to reform, but it has not succeeded. And so it is absolutely a ridiculous situation from a Western perspective to have these major conglomerates succumb to the pressures of this woman called Chesun-chil, who has no position in government, who has no political experience whatsoever, but simply because she knows somebody so powerful called the president of South Korea, they have succumbed completely to her pressures.
Yeah, just to remind viewers, they donated to. They're accused of donating to charities so that they could get deals approved. And when you see this unfold, what does that tell you about where South Korea's democracy is at today?
Well, South Korea's democracy, even before this political scandal and crisis, has been in a situation of what I call slippage. I call it democratic slippage. Increasingly over President Park's tenure in office, there has been censorship of the media, reduced freedoms for the media, association, etc. And the South Korean people have been feeling very, very tightened, forcibly tightened, coerced by the president for her high-handed tactics. And I think the kind of political frustrations that people had prior to the scandal have actually exploded. In my opinion, this political scandal, it is so alarming in this way that the highest elected official would share government documents and secrets with a person who has no security clearance and who has no political office or authority in the country. That is, to me, the most alarming aspect. The rest of the problems, we've seen them before in South Korea. What to me is so different about this time is that South Koreans are finally, the public is finally waking up to this understanding that democracy is not something you fight for once and then you just take advantage of. and you enjoy. They are finally realizing that democracy is something we need to be vigilant about constantly, 24/7. And I think that's a message for South Koreans as well as for Americans, given what the elections have recently proved to be.
Yeah, and the issue, I suppose, of who gets security clearance is a topical subject in the country where you are these days.
Yes.
Kathy Moon. Let me
Yes, family members and friends, right?
Let me ask you on this. We're poking fun at the United States these days during Malavik, but could we not also poke fun at France? Because don't we live in a country where you have the political elites and the business elites of these big corporations that attend the same grandes écoles, as they're known, these same elitist schools?
I mean, culturally speaking, and here we talk about the elite, right? The elite in our mind is the people who have been to the high schools, Lena and the big high schools for specific social class, And then, I mean, the gap between those people now, in power and the people working daily, daily working, I mean, the gap is getting wider and wider. And even though, the perception of the high presidential activity is completely criticized. It's disappointing for a lot of people of the public opinion. And for South Korea, I totally agree with our correspondent in Boston. I mean, she summed up everything. Democracy is not granted. And now the people they are used to that in South Korea. Even in the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, you had the kingdoms and you had the Min Queen and you had plots and conspiracy that destroyed Korea Peninsula and allowed the Japanese to come in.
All right, you
see, I don't know whether you agree with me, Miss from Wesley, but I think
Moon.
it was also divided, conspiracy, plots behind the scenes. You had mudang and you had shaman, monks. You had everything already, and it pop up again now in the 21st century. That's amazing.
All right, but we're seeing a shift as far as that goes and how South Korea sees itself regionally. Last week, there were protests over a South Korea-Japan intelligence sharing deal. Up to now, to share information on North Korea, the two countries had to go through Washington, a remnant of World War II, and Japan occupied the Korean peninsula. Well, what's your take? Let me bring in Claire Ham on this. What's your take on those protests against South Korea and Japan having a warming of ties when it comes to sharing intelligence?
I think at the time they're making a deal. A lot of photographers, they refused to taking photos in protest because all these government deals, diplomacy, she never asked us what we think. Even the comfort women issues, she never asked even single time about what the victims think about the deal, and she just go through. And Abe is known for strengthening their military power, and I don't know if it eventually helps South Korea, the peace and all in the region. But we are mostly upset because she don't communicate with the people. She just make a decision by herself or with the help of her best friend, Choi Soon-sil.
But the war was a long time ago, right?
Yeah.
And there are many people in Japan who oppose a militarization of Japan. Would you say South Korea and Japan are closer now or not?
No, I don't think so.
Can I add something? What you said is just, okay, look at history. It looks like it's a long time ago. War is over. War is not over in Northeast Asia. You don't have any peace treaty between the two Koreas. You don't have peace treaty between Japan and Russia. And then the United States pushed South Korea and Japan to sign the intelligence sharing deal. Otherwise, because South Korea was getting closer to China, and they wanted South Korea and Japan to be closer together, to run against China and to run against North Korea. War is still in the air.
Kathy Moon, now that the sound and fury of the U.S. campaign is over, how's Donald Trump going to handle that? Is the United States still going to be backing South Korea? Again, there is officially, as was just mentioned by Dorian Malovic, there still is officially a state of war between the two Koreas. Now that the campaign is over, is Donald Trump going to continue the policies of his predecessors when it comes to the Korean Peninsula?
The answer to that is we don't know. And until the Trump elect transition team gets their house in order and lines up their secretaries and other top-level officials, we won't have a clear path toward any type of policy, domestic or international. But as far as South Korea goes, no matter what Trump said during the campaign, it is not possible once you become president of the United States to completely disregard military intelligence, military assessments, and the generals and admirals and others who will weigh in. This happened when President Carter back in the 70s had promised during the election campaign that he would withdraw all U.S. troops from South Korea. And as soon as he became president, the military top brass absolutely said no. It is unadvisable, it is unwise, and he had to back down. And I think any leader of the United States breaking basic agreements based on military alliances, which are very serious treaties, this is something that cannot be done lightly. So I don't have a fear that U.S. postures toward Korea will change in any significant way militarily. And once Donald Trump gets educated about the dangers in East Asia, I think he will come to see, if he has any rationality at all, that this is a seriously, seriously dangerous area and that the U.S. cannot afford to play around. I'd like to get back to the issue of Japan and the political scandals,
Sure.
if I may. I think it's really important to keep in mind that this political scandal and crisis, it is not just about Chaesun-sil Gate, as some people call it. The outpouring of protests, in my view, I've studied social movement protests in Korea. I have a book on it from 2012. From my scholarly experience, South Koreans tend to have a melange of grievances that they then explode in one particular, when an incident occurs and the explosion happens. And that means that they have multiple types of grievances. So your guest already talked about the Seoul ferry sinking, but also socioeconomic grievances on the part of the Korean society, especially the younger generation. They are in a dire situation with about 2/3 of young people stuck in temporary jobs even after 10 years of being in the workforce. So economic insecurity, the absolute disappointment that they study so hard and sacrifice to go to school, university, and then they can't get a job, while Chaesun-sil, who has no academic standing of her own, her daughter, who has absolutely no academic credibility of her own, all of a sudden these people gain the highest reaches of Korean society by misusing or abusing their political access. So I think economic frustration, also discontent with Korea-Japan relations, also discontent with the South Korean government's Park administration's decision to emplace THAAD, the U.S. Missile defense system on South Korean soil. All of these and many more issues are stuck together in this very, very dramatic and emotional explosion of people's discontent.
And it's all come to a head. We were talking about how South Korea sees itself, and it's become a political issue. In the midst of everything that has just been described by Kathy Moon, the government unveiling new history textbooks for public schools that state that the South Korean government is the only legal government within the Korean peninsula. Let's take a listen.
우리 사회는 지난 10여
For the last decade, we've been through social conflict and political opposition due to controversies regarding history textbooks. It is now time to resolve these disputes and achieve national unity.
국민적 통합을 이루어 나가야 합니다.
Will these new history textbooks help to achieve national unity?
I think it creates conflict, actually. because I think with any citizen with the common sense would agree. Even the elementary school children came out to protest about this issue, because history is not, it shouldn't be written by the government. It should let all these scholars and public figures, that they should write many different versions of history. You know, history is not Park Geun-hye's family. It's not about her families, and somehow she wants to make her father looks great, and she wants to change the whole history book, and the lies, and there's a lot of lies and factual false information and so on. We are not North Korea. We're supposed to be democracy, but she somehow forbid other private publishers and then have a one textbook. This is not democracy, and this is not okay for us. You know,
not okay for you. Claire Ham, we're going to have to leave it there because unfortunately we're out of time. I want to thank as well Dorian Mallard. So much more to say, but the story is not over. I want to thank as well Kathy Moon for joining us from Boston. Stay with us. Our Media Watch segment is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
Emma.
James. Oh, I love it. Emma James. That's a character, you know, a movie character. Emma James. I love it.
Emma, tell us about the characters that are and they are characters in South Korea.
Yes, I know. It's almost like a Greek tragedy. But obviously not in Greece. It is very much a country in flux, and it is interesting to see what people's reactions are to what happened today, that speech from Park Geun-hye. Alex Jensen, who is a journalist based in Korea, had this to say: President Park happy to leave her fate up to the National Assembly. No wonder, as lawmakers probably can't even agree on next week's lunch menu, which is a little harsh.
Exactly this.
It's good to know he's got that right. But taking a look elsewhere, the Korea Times has been canvassing opinion, and they say that this address has failed to quell public anger. It's her third apology, and it hasn't been seen as sincere. The kind of quotes we're seeing are: she hasn't changed since the scandal broke out. She's deceiving the people with excuses, blaming others when she is the main culprit. And of course, prosecutors have accused her of collusion. They also have another quote saying it's very irresponsible of her to leave her resignation up to the Assembly. Protests are expected to continue. This was the scene last weekend. This Twitter user thinks that there were 1.6 million people out on the streets. The estimates vary very, very widely indeed, but even the most conservative believes that there were more than 250,000 people out there, which is an unusual scene in South Korea. Taking a look at this one too, from All K-pop of all things, normally dealing with the jangly electro-pop from Korea. Even they are talking about the problems faced by President Park, and they talk about the fact that her popularity has plummeted. She is down to a lowly 4%, the lowest ever seen in Korean politics, with a 93% disapproval rating. That compares with a 63% approval rating when she first came to power.
So you're saying electro-pop could become protest music? All right.
I'm not too sure about that, though.
All right. Well, at least, I'm going to defend President Park here. At least she doesn't use Twitter too much.
Yes, absolutely. Unlike the president-elect of the United States.
She has to watch drama, soap opera after 8. She doesn't work after 8. And not after 10. She doesn't work before 10 a.m.
That's good to know. Perhaps we need to get Donald Trump interested in South Korean soap operas so that he will stop hitting his keyboard. Because as you can see from this tweet, good morning, America. It's 7 a.m. and your president-elect is currently on a Twitter rant against the First Amendment. Now, his tweet said nobody should be allowed to burn the American flag. If they do, there must be consequences, perhaps loss of citizenship or a year in jail. Lots of people reporting on this one. The Daily Beast reports that this outburst may not be quite as random as it first appears, because at the same time as he was tweeting... This is an old
chestnut in the United States.
Absolutely, but at that particular moment when he tweeted, there was an item on Fox News about students burning the American flag. So it's not as out of context as some might think. However, some people don't care what the context is. David, from the senior editor of The Atlantic, if Trump wants to imprison flag burners, imagine what he'll try to do to journalists who report on his corruption. Another Twitter user, Gavin Newsom, a US politician, says the Supreme Court has ruled it's protected under the First Amendment, the freedom of speech, of course. He's also pointed out it's very worrisome that in Trump's mind, 1 year of jail is equivalent to the loss of citizenship. Now, as you mentioned, it isn't the first time, it's far from the first time, in fact, that people have talked about criminalising flag burning, and a lot of people rushing to point out, as everyone's very, very incensed by this idea that Donald Trump has tweeted people should be punished, they've also pointed out that Hillary Clinton once introduced a bill to criminalise flag burning. So it's not quite as clear-cut as it might have appeared. One of my favourite tweets on this one is this, though, from Elliot Lustig. Too many people today are acting like Trump's tweets are just a distraction. Don't. The moment we lose our sense of outrage, we're done. People very, very concerned about what he has to say when his hands hit that keyboard.
All right, Emma James, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.